hanging from one generation to another. The king and his family was ousted. As he was about to leave, people screamed, "God bless the rebel." They said so, not me. Not in so many words, I'm just paraphrasing as it happened decades ago. It happened that month of September on the entrance of a bunch of dictators. A quiet revolution broke out, and suddenly a young dictator was ruling an oil country in North Africa. Are rebels unsung heroes? Which one among them? Isn't a rebel someone that disrupts peace, whereas innocent people are killed by the hundreds for just one man's ideology? Why should rebels impose their own views on an already congregated and established number of people that live in peace even among a dictator's ruling? I lived under several dictatorships in several countries. No one ever bothered me or my friends. It does only make a difference to the rival, that special someone that wants to replace a dictator. That is when it becomes a challenge issue to another dictator to step in, and up with death threats as it goes uncalled for and should be punished with apprehension, but it never does. Death toll go up and even uncounted. Family lose loved ones, relatives get lost. Some dead corpses are sometimes unclaimed because family are scared to admit that someone in their family was going against the grain of the sudden overpowering government. So a lot of them don't even claim the bodies of their dead family members, found killed along the road or in the middle of the street during a street fight. I knew of Arab mothers that wept and lamented about their remorse as they never claimed their child's body and said so for many years after, just to protect the rest of the family. For the reason that in a civilized organization, the only way to get a dictator out is through talk, convincing masses of people that there are better ways to run politics. It could be done by conveying new ideology within conversation and discussion for a renewal of another succession. But since the rival rebellious dictator would want to have a seat in the house of Arabian lords, by all means and by force, he, usually a man, becomes a rebel. Thus, plenty of innocent people are killed through mass murdering revolution. Sadly, it's usually just one man's ideology that may later recruit just about anyone wanting to abide to his ruling. I know. I lived through it in North Africa. At the time, there was no Christmas Island, no asylum seeker, no refugee camps for Arab fleeing. There was no Guantanamo Bay or anything similar to plead a cause for freedom for Arabs. No cause to point fingers at the UN, and so forth. It was just a desert island out of an oasis with angry men on camels. Isn't it usually irritated men with an enormous thirst of blood? Nevertheless, I have been living there in the past before moving out heading to Europe and somewhat later to Canada. In the midst of a revolution, I used my camera. I still have film shots of young students, not older than 18-year-old, hanging off a cross-like death pole in front of a church. My old-fashioned Super 8 home movies, which I'm not able to convert into YouTube files yet. Anyhow, what use will it serve now? We may see it all happen again in a more intense and modern version with the current mass slaughter all over North Africa and in the Middle East. Far worse than it was then. The sadness gets me ever so much thinking back of a couple of friends I met there and left behind. This particular hanging happened in front of a church in Midtown, also the biggest square there, and I happened to live in front of the church in a high-rise. I took movie shots from the fourth-floor balcony. This church was a Catholic church that was shared with other denominations. It had a huge international library, a sports center, a school, and also housing for orphans of all races. Sometimes Muslim mothers that had unwanted baby girls dropped them off there in silence without being asked any questions. Catholic nuns took care of them until they grew up into young ladies and often became nuns themselves. Or some of them were betrothed to nice men that wanted religious Catholic women with an Italian education and gentle behavior. It sounds like a heaven for some of the unwanted girls. Some cultures think as an extremely bad omen when you have too many of them. Now back to the hanging matter. Strangely, the hanging all happened during Easter time, just about like this past week. And no, it wasn't an reenactment of Jesus Christ's crucifixion. Among many of my neighbors and I that watched thought so at the first glimpse. But it was rather a hanging of several young boys that tried to impress the new regime by launching a homemade bomb at the vessel that was about to leave with the king's family. The dictator actually protected the royal family. He wanted them to leave unharmed with all their belongings, even with their own vessel that was given off. The new dictator was none other but Colonel Muhammad al-Gaddafi. And now, currently, as we may observe in the current news, other rebels want him out with a more gruesome bloodbath. This is just a resumed and rapid paraphrase extract of a chapter out of my book from my extended and unlimited travel logs. I've lived in many countries and seen all shapes of forms of regimes. During my lifetime, I've seen several ideologies and racial culture. I've lived in the colorful wild path of living, as any European would observe as extremely interesting. This is just a short bit. Ask away, and I may tell you more if you're curious enough to know more.